For most companies in and around the data center ecosystem, there's some that thrive in that very small business startup-y kind of phase of 1 to 10. Most typically set the floor at least 10 employees or 50 employees. Most will set the ceiling somewhere at 1,000 plus, unless they have unusually strong capabilities to be able to sell to true enterprise Fortune 500 kinds of companies. So size is certainly a factor. And then if you look at the intersection of location and a specific kind of business, a business model or an industry or vertical market, all of a sudden there's some regulatory issues that can often come up at the intersection of especially data center operators and data center technologies. And hello, data center friends around the globe. Good afternoon. For a lot of you, it's good morning. For some of you, it is maybe good evening. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about all over the data center industry, regardless of whether you're from a data center operator like a co-location, wholesale, hyperscale, edge, modular, wholesale kind of provider, or whether you're from a technology company or facilities company that sells to or partners with data centers, or perhaps you're from a construction or real estate related company or investment related company that sells to or partners with data centers, or maybe your company does something related to outsourced sales and marketing within the data center ecosystem. But regardless of what your company does, if you are on a go-to-market team, meaning that you work in sales, marketing, account management, sometimes known as customer success, product management, channel partnerships, or you are the chief executive or executive sponsor that's like the orchestra conductor that pulls everyone together, you're absolutely positively in the right place if you are looking to level up on all things go-to-market sales and marketing. At DCSMI, we're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To make sure that you stay on top of upcoming live events like this and other related educational resources, make sure that you're subscribed to our weekly email newsletter, the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox every Sunday. To subscribe, sign up directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. And without any further delay, let's jump right into this week's questions. What are we going to be tackling? We'll first look at how a data center telecommunications network provider can create great content. Then we'll turn our attention to how a data center system simulation provider can find product market fit, PMF, for their technology. After that, we'll turn our attention to how a data center lighting and energy optimization company can drive more conversions. That'll put us at the halftime mark, at which point we'll take a quick break from our sponsor. Then we'll come back and look at how a virtualized network and data center services firm can effectively use customer personas, buyer personas. After that, we'll look at how a data center sales professional, how data center sales teams can use LinkedIn and email campaigns to gain credibility. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's data center go-to-market sales and marketing Q&A live stream, we'll look at how a data center marketing and sales consulting firm can reach decision makers. So let's jump into this week's first question. How does a data center telecommunications network provider create great content? How does a data telecommunications network provider create great content? That is a fantastic question, and it's incredibly important for today's self-propelled buyer's journey. What is the self-propelled buyer's journey? If we were hosting this live stream about a decade ago, at the time, most of your prospects and clients would spend about half of their buyer's journey, half of your sales cycle, with your sales team. At the time, the prevailing stat that was thrown around was from CEB, the corporate executive board that's now owned by Gartner. And at the time, 56% of a typical buyer's journey was over before sales contact. So that means that your account executives, your sales development reps, they still got to spend a lot of time with prospects and future clients. Add 10 years of digital transformation, add a lot of baby boomers retiring and more Gen Zers entering the workforce and greater influence by millennials and Gen X. And we're now in a place where that number has changed quite dramatically. And don't forget, at the beginning of the 2020s, millions or tens of millions of people spent, especially knowledge workers, spent most of those 2 years working at home. So we ended up with a very self-driven buyer's journey. So that number, that 56%, now hovers in the 80s. Actually, 83% is where Gartner currently puts the percentage of the buyer's journey that your prospects and clients want to spend by themselves, doing all of their research, comparing options, and evaluating pricing before they're open to meeting with someone from your sales team. In other words, their process is 83% done, 83% baked before you get to meet them, before you even know that that opportunity exists. And that is a really big challenge for a lot of old school companies that are still using the same traditional sales and marketing playbook that they've used for the last 10 or 20 years. But it's also an enormous opportunity for those go-to-market teams across sales, marketing, account management, channel partnerships, product managers that are able to get in early in the right places at the right time with the right people, and most of all, for the right reasons, so that you and your team are seen as the definitive go-to experts in your space when it comes to anything and everything having to do with being a data telecommunications network provider. So, with that in mind, this is how we need to approach your content strategy. We need to first recognize that that self-driven buyer's journey is a really big deal. Second, we need to be mindful of who we sell to and who we service. And at a high level, first we need to define it at the company level. And then within the company, we need to look at the kinds of people within the company that we're creating this content for. So at the company level, we want to create and document our ideal client profile, our ICP, so that we know where they're located geographically. This is going to largely be a function of where your company is able to sell and service efficiently, where your telecommunications facilities are. So geographically, where are these ideal clients located? Are they just in your state or province? So can you cover the whole country? Can you cover multiple countries? Can you cover a continent? Can you cover global? That's super important as we're documenting your ideal client profile. And that's going to play a large role in both your content creation and content promotion, content distribution strategy. Second, what size? Are there companies that are way too big for you, where you just be outmatched by much larger incumbents, or perhaps some facets of this being done in-house? Or are there companies that are too small to afford your minimums? Think Goldilocks, not too big, not too small. What is the right band by number of employees or revenue? Number of employees is, I think, a really great place to start, because LinkedIn, which is where you're likely going to do a lot of this research and implementation, goes based on number of employees. Like, for example, LinkedIn defines a very small business as like 1 to 10 employees. The next size up is like 11 to 50. Then you get to 51 to 200, 201 to 500, 501 to 1,000, 1,000 to 5,000, 5,000 to 10,000, and then 10,000 plus. For most companies in and around the data center ecosystem, they're typically, there's some that thrive in that very small business startup kind of phase at 1 to 10. Most typically set the floor at least 10 employees or 50 employees. Most will set the ceiling somewhere at 1,000 plus, unless they have unusually strong capabilities to be able to sell to true enterprise Fortune 500 kinds of companies. So size is certainly a factor. And then if you look at the intersection of location and a specific kind of business, a business model or an industry or vertical market, all of a sudden there's some regulatory issues that can often come up at the intersection of especially data center operators and data center technologies. And some of those regulatory issues are industry agnostic. For example, the European Union, California, they certainly have a lot of IT related regulations that come up regardless of the vertical market or industry specialization. But yeah, at a high level, when we're thinking of your content strategy, we need to get your ideal client profile documented. And if you have a pretty well established business, if you don't have this documented, a great place to start is the case studies section of your website. Look at where you've been most successful and what they have in common. Once you've figured out the companies that you're building this content for, next we need to figure out the individuals within these companies that matter most. These are your buyer personas. A buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of an ideal client based on actual research and some select educated speculation. The research is incredibly important. All too often, people either don't have these documented at all or pull these out of thin air by talking to a couple of internal stakeholders that in a perfect world are giving you their insights because they've been in the industry and selling to this particular buyer persona for a really, really long time. And that can be valuable input, but it shouldn't be the majority of your input, let alone all of your inputs. So let's say you're talking to someone in a sales role and an account management role and a product management role, and they give you great input for understanding this particular buyer persona. Take that internal input and consider it about 20, 25% of the puzzle. The other 75, 80% of building out an effective buyer persona has to come from their own words, from talking to actual people that fit in that definition of the buyer persona that you're building. And in a perfect world, you're talking to them face to face, visiting them in their own offices. The next best thing is probably a video conference. So you can see body language, intonation, and really get behind the scenes of understanding their biggest goals and their challenges, their frustrations, their stressors, what their daily routine is like, what they secretly desire the most, what would it take for them to prioritize the kind of initiative that you'd be talking about. And when you find the consensus on all that you roll that up into an actual buyer persona. So first preference in person, second preference would be like video conference or perhaps a phone call if as a last resort. If you don't have access to any of that because your company is brand new into this segment or penetrating into a new market or you're a complete startup, search and social can actually be a pretty good way to find their own words as well. So let's say, for example, you define what you think the buyer persona is. Go to LinkedIn, do a search, get 10 or 20 profiles, and amalgamate, synthesize together what you learn from studying those 10 or 20 profiles about how they self-describe themselves when it comes to their biggest goals and their biggest challenges and their biggest frustrations and where they hang out online and offline, what they read, how they're influenced, how they prioritize. And you can, of course, take those same 10 or 20 people and go to a search, go to a Google search and look and see what comes up. Maybe there's trade journals that they've written for, news releases that they've been quoted in, conferences that they've spoken at where you can watch the videos, podcasts and webinars that they've presented out, which also provides a lot more context than just reading their words because you get the body language and intonation. All of that, wrap that into part of your research for your buyer personas. The most important kind of economic stakeholder that this content is for becomes your primary buyer persona. The second most important kind of stakeholder that you're building this content for is your secondary buyer persona. And in some cases, there may be a third category of person that you're building this content for, a tertiary buyer persona. Over time as well, as you build a more sophisticated playbook in your CRM and perhaps in some of your paid search, paid social kind of campaigns, you'll develop a negative buyer persona. These are the people that on the surface may seem like they could be a good fit to bring into the conversation, to loop in with the internal champion, to invite them into the decision by committee kind of scenario. But you've been doing this a while and you know that this particular person in this particular company, when they show up, they mess things up royally. So that becomes the one you actually don't want to actively go after. And you probably want to have some drop down list sitting in your lead generation forms on your website and in your CRM for filtering or anti-filtering, excluding. And you can, of course, depending on the platform, whether it's something like LinkedIn ads and LinkedIn campaign manager or Google ads or something like that, there's different ways to approach people that you want to specifically exclude based on who they are, where they are, different characteristics and things like that. So at a high level, when it comes to developing great content for a company that provides data telecommunications, that's a data telecommunications network provider, start by understanding just how self-propelled the buyer's journey is. get your mind around the company, what defines the company in your ideal client profile. That'll help you build out your target account list, which will become really helpful when you're doing outbound or ads or both, to get your content in front of the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, so that you and your team are seen as the go-to experts in this space. And then we have to be extremely mindful of who we're creating this content for, the buyer personas. And I'd even go so far as to say prioritize the buyer personas, because each will need its own content strategy. Each will need its own premium content and lead generation offers, and its own email marketing, and its own page and videos on your website, and perhaps its own webinars and its own podcasts. The more strong the unit economics are, the more compelling, the more higher priority that particular buyer persona is to your company, the more resources you would typically invest. But content needs to start from the standpoint of extreme empathy for who they are, what they care about, what gets them promoted, what if they screw up gets them the opposite of a promotion, and bake everything around your content around educating and building trust, so that you're able to stay with them throughout the buyer's journey, the active research process that they go through between being a complete stranger and ultimately a new client for your company. And most market research firms now peg that there's about 28 different touch points that happen between complete stranger and purchase decision. And when you do this right at a world-class level, you'll figure out a way to get in there early in the awareness stage and stay with them through the middle, the consideration stage, all the way to the decision stage. Most companies in this space, like a typical data telecommunications network provider that's kind of sort of phoning it in, will have some content in the decision stage, but they'll completely be missing in action when it comes to the awareness and consideration stage. And that is a fatal flaw because that opens the door for your competitors to get in early and get in often and educate and build trust with the people that you want to be your future clients. So when you do this right, they get such incredible levels of value from those 28 touch points that your company provides to them that there's no reason for them to want to spend time with anyone else. When you do this right, you will no longer need reps that are constantly hounding prospects, begging for meetings. It'll be the other way around. Your prospects will want to spend time with members of your team. And when you do this right, everything improves with clarity for your product roadmap, your profit margins, your unit economics, your company's evaluation, employee morale, employee recruiting, employee retention. Everything gets better when you get extreme clarity about who you're creating this content for. And it's being especially cognizant that we're doing it in today's marketplace, where we need to show up as a consultant, a teacher, a trusted advisor, a subject matter expert, and perhaps even rising to the level of a thought leader. How does a data center system simulation provider find product market fit for their technology? How does a company that provides data center system simulation find product market fit for their technology? That's a terrific question. And it's one that startups deal with for a huge part of the early stages of the growth of their business. Just to make sure that everyone is on the same page, product market fit, PMF, is the degree to which you know exactly who your ideal clients are, exactly what products and services they purchase from your company, at which price points they pay for those products and services, how often they purchase, or the length of recurring agreements and subscriptions, and a host of other unit economics that come into play, like understanding the annual customer value, lifetime value, LTV, cost of client acquisition, CAC, sometimes called COCA, COCA, average sales cycle length, profit margins. All of those come into focus when you have product market fit. And early on, one of the biggest obstacles and one of the biggest goals for a brand new company is to try to do everything in your power to accelerate the march to product market fit, because it's really difficult to justify investors putting more capital into your business until you've achieved product market fit. The next level, the next big milestone in terms of business growth and maturity beyond product market fit, is often known as go-to market fit, GTMF. Go-to market fit means you've figured out most of what you need to, or hopefully all of what you need to with product market fit, and you're able to sustain that. That's an important point too with both product market fit and go to market fit, is that this isn't one and done. We're in a dynamic marketplace. There's always newcomers, there's always new segments, there's always new needs. The world is changing, the competitive battleground is changing, the industry is changing, your buyer personas are changing, the size of their companies and their strategic focus are always changing. So you can have product market fit, and if you're not constantly on your toes, you can lose it. So it's really, really important to make sure that you're constantly evaluating this. And if you have the luxury of having a product management team, product managers, then this is something that they spend a lot of time losing sleep over, is how to get it and maintain it over time and eventually expand it into additional markets. So, so go to market fit is the degree to which you have nailed product market fit, PMF, and you're confident that as you pour more capital to scale demand even further, that the wheels don't fall off. So go to market fit a lot of times is in any kind of subscription based business that's based on monthly recurring or annual recurring revenue. SaaS would be a great example, but certainly there's a lot of instances within the data center industry within infrastructure as a service and co-location and wholesale where your agreements are based on recurring revenue. So go to market fit, make sure that as you add more capital, that your metrics either at least maintain themselves or get better over time. And that's incredibly important, especially for capital intensive businesses that have external boards of directors or venture backed or private equity or something along those lines. So for a company that's relatively new, that's in the system simulation business, that wants to get to product market fit for their company, I would encourage you to be super specific about who you think the ideal companies are and who the ideal buyers are within those companies. So when you're doing your initial product research, when you're talking to future potential clients, make sure you're directionally focused on a defined, documented ideal client profile. In other words, you know where you're trying to get this beachhead. Is there a certain geographic region where you're most likely to get initial traction, which in the case of something related to SaaS or technology for data centers, probably is defined by a combination of where you have coverage, where you and the founding team are physically located. And in the case of the region, perhaps there's language issues that come into play as well. For example, if you're based in the US and you don't think for several years that you're going to be able to localize your platform into multiple languages, then you probably are defining your addressable market as US, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, something like that, and a handful of other countries. But there's certain EU issues that come up even in parts of Europe. Obviously, UK isn't part of the EU, but there's things that will come up depending on regional regulatory issues that will factor into how you collect and analyze the data over time as well. So product market fit works so much better when you have a very tight definition of what your ideal client profile, your ICP, or your TAM, your total addressable market is. And then you also have a pretty strong hypothesis on who the users are going to be and who the economic buyers are, because in many cases they're different people. The users of the simulation providing software could be, depending on what you actually do within the data center, could be facilities professionals, they could be technology professionals. Depending on the size of the data center operator that you're selling to, it could be a little bit of both. There could be an economic stakeholder that's a little bit outside of that. Maybe it's a COO or a CFO, or in a relatively small company, and maybe even the CEO. So having a firm grasp on who you're trying to reach, who you're trying to get product market fit with at the company level and at the individual level is really, really important to make sure that you're focusing your initial conversations on the right people. I would also encourage you, as you're getting to these meetings, to be simultaneously leaning into the reality that your buyers, especially technology executives and facilities managers, facilities directors, are becoming over time very, very allergic to sales contact. And obviously, if you're at an early stage of the company, they're getting interactions with like you as a CEO or a COO or CTO or on the founding team. So it's certainly something a little special. Certainly, it can be very special depending on the nature of your bios and your previous backgrounds before you launch this company. Just recognize that most of your buyer personas are more sales allergic than they've ever been at any previous time in the history of the data center industry. What does that mean? They really don't want to spend time with anyone in a sales context until they're just about ready to buy. So it can be more difficult to get to these good quality conversations if people don't already know of your brand, which by definition of a startup, they don't know of, and if they don't know of the brand of your founding team, of the individual people that are on your team. So this would be what your founding team did before they joined your company that's providing a simulation, data center system simulation software. So that becomes incredibly important. Along the same lines, the first cousin of that is recognizing that because they're not willing to meet with anyone in a sales context until they're very far along, your content, your educational resources, your thought leadership, your webinars, your videos, your podcasts, your downloadables, your premium content are in most cases taking the place of what used to happen in one-on-one conversations. So a lot of people make a very big mistake early on with thinking that it's too early for them to start a blog and it's too early for them to start sharing relevant content on their LinkedIn profiles and on a LinkedIn company page. And it's too early to start a YouTube channel. I call BS on that. The reason I call big BS on that is because most of your highly technical, somewhat cynical prospects and clients that you want to build a relationship with are going online to look for answers to their biggest goals, their biggest stressors, their biggest challenges, things they need to figure out to help them in their jobs, help their teams, help their companies get to the next level. Things that are driving them nuts, things where the wheels are falling off in their facilities, and they need to figure out, because if they don't figure out, they could lose revenue, they could lose clients, they could have a reputational hit, there could be massive regulatory fines, and at the minimum, they're probably losing out on a lot of nights, weekends, when they don't normally work nights and weekends. They're losing out on free time with their friends and families. They could have vacations that have been scuttled or compromised because of these issues. There's a lot of things that are stressing them out. And in the old days, they would wait till the conference or the printed trade publication showed up in their mailbox for them to actually figure out how to solve these stressors and these challenges. And the world we live in now, LinkedIn, YouTube, Google, Gemini, ChatGPT, Copilot, all of these tools have become the new 7x24 by 365 conference. So you may think that you only need to have coverage available during what you think are business hours for the one or more time zones that you are located in. However, you would be shocked if you start watching when conversions happen on your website, when registrations happen on your website, when signups happen on your website, that you see people that are in your time zone that are up at 2:00 in the morning, your local time, trying to figure these things out. Why are they up at 2:00 in the morning trying to figure these things out? Because if they don't figure out, there's massive consequences to their professional reputation, their team, their company, and all those other host of stressors that I just mentioned a few moments ago. So having a strong point of view, answering the biggest questions, like anything that one of those buyer personas is going to go to Google or a personal assistant or social media to ask their peers or friends or colleagues about, you should have an answer to those 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 biggest questions sitting on your blog, sitting on your website, sitting on your YouTube channel, shared on your LinkedIn profile, because that content is taking the place of what happened in conversations 5, 10, 15 years ago. And to the extent that you're able to answer their questions, like, that was pretty good. That was pretty helpful. You've successfully grabbed them in by the virtual shirt collars and stopped the scroll. And the next logical step is, they seem pretty helpful. They seem to know their stuff. What else do they have to say? And that's when they notice, oh, cool, there's a downloadable guide or report or an ebook or a webinar or an on-demand webinar, yeah, sure, I'll sign up for that. I want to learn more. And that's when an anonymous visitor becomes a known lead that you can begin to educate and build trust with as they navigate through their buyer's journey. And a little tip that you can use to get to product market fit even faster is any forms that you have on your website where you're currently collecting data from leads who are raising their hand and saying, yeah, I'm interested. Ask them a write-in question. So in this particular context for a data center system simulation provider, I would ask them, what is your biggest question that you have about data center system simulation? What is your biggest stressor? What is your biggest struggle or challenge about data center system simulation? And you would be shocked with as few as a few dozen people answering that question, how much you start to learn that's going to accelerate your race towards product market fit, that's going to make a material impact on experiments that you're going to run that dramatically impact your product roadmap. So for sure, ask that question. That's the argument too for the first cousin of that kind of conversion, of holding webinars and live streams and doing surveys, so you can collect more information from them on what's top of mind for them when it comes to data center system simulation, software system simulation platforms. The more data you can collect outside of these formal meetings, the more you're going to get out of those individual meetings that you have. Because again, if your buyers are remotely similar to the majority of the data center ecosystem, they're spending 83% of their time outside of conversations with you. So the way to tap into that 83% is you need to show up as a teacher, a consultant, a subject matter expert, a trusted advisor, and perhaps even a thought leader when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center system simulation. So that is the key to product market fit. Oh, one more big thing to keep in mind as well is that when you do a fantastic job educating and building trust with these most important kinds of buyer personas in these most important kinds of companies, it is far more likely that when you get to meet them, either face to face or on a Zoom or however you're meeting them, that they've been so blown away by the insights that you've provided and the value that you've provided in your content and your webinars, that it is far more likely that they trust you enough to say, look, Joshua, I love what you're doing. I love your approach with all of this, but there's one feature that's missing. And if you address this one feature, not only would I be able to jump on and do a pilot, I have 3 friends that are in other companies, similar size, dealing with the same issue. And I'm nearly certain that all 3 of them would do a pilot, would jump on board as well. And a huge unlock with getting that kind of relationship with someone at the first meeting is because your content, your events have paved the way to educating and building trust and getting them to see you in a completely different light. So they see you more as an enterprise consultant and less as a pushy traditional salesperson. Another big way that you'll know that this is working is you get to your first meeting with that prospect and you're meeting with the committee, you're meeting with the decision committee at that point, either on Zoom or in person, and you can't believe what you're hearing. They have literally adopted your methodology that you talk about in your blogs, in your downloadables, in your webinars as the framework that they use to evaluate all of the other companies in your category. So your content, your educational experiences have not only shaped how they view all of the other alternatives in the marketplace, but it is effectively not only guaranteed that you're on the short list, but it has neutralized most of the other competitive options. And they've even adopted your terminology for how to look at this among multiple people on the decision committee. That's how you know this is working. So if you are serious about growing a company in the data center system simulation space and getting to product market fit as a new entrant in the market sooner rather than later, show up as a teacher, a trusted advisor, a consultant, a subject matter expert, and a thought leader. It will not only open doors with the right people in the right places at the right time, but it will assure you that when you get to these sales conversations and eventually to these onboarding conversations, that they view you in a completely different light and you have finally escaped from the vendor box in a way that accelerates and helps you maintain product market fit. Next question up is, how does a data center lighting and energy optimization company drive more conversions? So how does a company that's principally in the business of data center lighting and optimizing energy drive more conversions from their website and ultimately from their sales process? It starts with figuring out what business you're truly in. And for a company that provides lighting and energy optimization, if I'm looking at your website and I'm looking for a who we help page, that hopefully will help me figure out like what your ideal client profile and if I as a prospect or a client fit into that. Under the who we help, it may also not only talk about the companies, it may talk about the kinds of stakeholders that you traditionally work with. So maybe it's a facilities manager, maybe it's an ESG officer, maybe it's a sustainability engineer, something like that. So I know the company, I know the individuals. Then I also need to figure out like what's top of mind for each of these kinds of stakeholders that we're going to work with to sell lighting and energy optimization. And that will come from a combination of experience over time with like your case studies. It can come from podcast interviews. It can come from hosting webinar panels or just basic doing buyer persona research where you're interviewing your existing clients, handful or two or three, depending on how deep you want to go and whether you're getting consensus or need to keep digging. But we need to understand who the most important kind of a stakeholder is when it comes to lighting and energy optimization. That would be your primary buyer persona. Who's the second most important kind of stakeholder? We're basically trying to reverse engineer who's going to show up on the decision committee. And for each of those, if we really want to nail conversions, we need to make sure that we're talking about what they care about. What's top of mind for them, what their biggest professional goals are, what their team is goaled on, what their company is working on, what they're struggling with, what their biggest stressors, what their biggest frustrations and challenges are. To the extent that we do our homework, we do our research, and we know for our primary and our secondary, for our first and second most important category of stakeholders that we're building this business around, what they care most about, we need to make sure that all of our content on our website, all of our content that we share on social media, all of our events that we're hosting, producing, getting involved in, both offline events and online events. And by online events, it could be, at the risk of getting a little meta, it could be live streams and webinars. Offline events could be hosting like breakfast seminars, lunch and learn, symposia, hosting a workshop at someone else's industry conference. But we're talking about educational events that are intended for a specific buyer persona at a specific stage, life cycle stage with your company, or a specific stage of the buyer's journey. So with that, that's the key to really driving more conversions, is being mindful that we now live in a world where the self-propelled, the self-driven buyer's journey is the dominant buyer's journey. Nearly all decision makers now prefer to do a ton of upfront research before they meet with someone from your sales team. So we now need to use content and events for what used to happen in face-to-face conversations, because if we don't show up with content and events, our competitors will show up, and they're the ones that will be educating and building trust with the prospects and clients that we want most. So as long as you're able to provide value and have extreme empathy for what they care about and show up early and often in as many of those 28 touch points as possible, so you stay with them and basically guarantee that you're on the short list. And in some cases, your educational content and events start to over time knock out the marketplace alternatives from the shortlist, because they're spending so much time with you that there's really no need for them to go elsewhere to keep learning about lighting and energy optimization. So with all of that in mind, it really stacks the decks in your favor for all of the conversions to work so much better, because you're looking at it from their point of view, from their standpoint, walking a mile, a kilometer. You're truly understanding how each of these stakeholders looks at data center lighting and energy optimization. That's really the key to getting your conversions working really well on your website and elsewhere. Anything else that you're doing to drive people into your digital 724, 365 sales team that's helping to nurture and educate, build trust over time. Another big caveat that's worth mentioning is, in this space, a lot of people come to us and use LEAD, L-E-A-D, for two completely different kinds of contexts. Um, when you talk to somebody that is on the marketing or the demand generation side or conversion rate optimization or sales enablement, lead is typically meant to be someone that is a known person at a known company that has some ability to do possibly uh, something with getting in your funnel or doing business with your company in the future. They're not raising their hand. They're not ready for sales. They're not showing implicit or explicit signs that they're ready to talk with someone for your salesperson, but they're just known to be a lead. An opportunity is completely different. So in the case of, let's take a conversion, let's take someone that discovers your website because they did a search on Google or on Gemini or Copilot or Perplexity or Claude or whatever. They ended up on your website. They're reading this blog. It links to 2 or 3 other blogs. Before they know it, they spent a half hour on your website reading a handful of blog posts, and they're starting to get pretty impressed. On many of these blog posts, there were embedded videos, so they got to hear people from your team actually explaining and seeing their excitement, enthusiasm, body language, and everything as they navigated these issues. Like, wow, this is really good. What else do they have to say? Then they notice there's a call to action for a related downloadable guide, a planning guide, an ebook, a special report, something like that, a buyer's guide. They're like, wow, I'm really learning a lot from this company. They have great videos, great articles, great blogs. Sure, I'll trade my business card information for what's on the other side of the landing page. So they type in first name, last name. They tell you what their biggest question is about lighting and energy optimization for data centers, and they hit the download, submit, convert, register. So now you have a known lead, and you have a known lead that's starting to get pretty impressed about your value to the industry, and you're starting to see your company as an expert. When that person spends enough time on your website that they're deemed to be of interest to the sales team because they've either taken an action where they've become like a hand raiser, where they've said, I want to get a demo, I want to get a needs assessment or something like that. That's very clear that's going to get past the sales. Or they're such high value because they're sitting on a target account list, or they line up perfectly with your ideal client profile. That lead gets passed on to someone from your sales team. It's deemed marketing qualified at that point. And once someone from your sales team reviews it and says, looks pretty good, then that lead becomes sales qualified or sales accepted. Sales accepted lead would be an SAL, sales qualified lead an SQL. And once someone from the sales team actually meets with that individual and determines that, wow, we're really doing a great job with our content here. They love what we have to say. They're really, really bought into our way of approaching all this. And I think they're going to have a forecasted close date of November 15th and or 3 months from now, 8 months from now, 3 weeks from now, whatever it is, whatever the forecasted close date is that you anticipate based on your conversation with them. And I think there's a forecasted close amount. So once someone from your sales team has met with that person and there's a forecasted close date and a forecasted deal size, that person progresses on your deals board, on your pipeline, and you for sure have an opportunity at that point. So the reason I bring this up, there's a lot of people in sales and marketing that don't have a great relationship with each other because they're not on the same page about those two terms. So I would encourage you when it comes to talking about conversions to make sure that you get everyone together on your go-to-market team and you make sure that everyone is on the same page and actually document this in your wiki or whatever you're using to share your best practices and playbook, what a lead is versus what a sales opportunity is. Because when you get those things right, a lot of beautiful things can happen about the super important collaboration that needs to happen between your marketing and sales team. So you show up as one unified go-to-market team in the awareness and the consideration stages. Because in the old days, sales used to say that, content, conversions, that's marketing's job. Leave me alone until there's someone worth talking to. Their leads are usually whatever. The reality is in today's hyper-competitive buyer's journey, self-propelled buyer's journey, it is incredibly important for the whole team to show up early and often. So the sales, the AEs, the SDRs need to be prepared to come back in much earlier on in the buyer's journey than they ever have in their careers. And the marketing professionals that they collaborate with on this great content, on these great events, need to be prepared to take a role much deeper into the buyer's journey than they ever have before. But the key thing is multiple members from your team need to be seen as the experts, the definitive experts in your space when it comes to data center lighting and energy optimization. How you do that is a function of what your business does, your business model, and your addressable market, your ideal client profile, and your buyer personas. But it is incredibly important if you want to drive more conversions, that you show up early, that you show up as often as possible with the right people in the right places at the right time and in the right context, so you and your team are seen as the definitive go-to experts on data center lighting and energy optimization. The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com. Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And you are watching our weekly live stream, the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about globally throughout the data center industry, throughout the full ecosystem. So our next question up for this week that I am going to tackle is, how does a virtualized network and data center services firm more effectively use customer personas? How does a virtualized network and data center services company more effectively use customer personas? That is a terrific question. And in a perfect world, I would like to hope that everyone on your go-to-market team is focused on customer personas. Because traditionally, customer personas have been looked at as something that was primarily a quasi-academic exercise by marketers and product managers. The reality is, in the world we now live in, where we don't get a lot of at-bats, we don't get a lot of face time anymore with prospects and clients until they're just about ready to buy, buyer personas, customer personas are more important than ever. Because it used to be that when your prospects and clients spent like half of their journey, half of your sales cycle with your sales team, if things weren't that well-defined, weren't that tight on your website and your messaging, your more resourceful sales teams could fix it while the plane was in the air. We don't have that opportunity anymore because in nearly all cases within the data center ecosystem, especially with virtualized network and data center services, your buyers, your prospects, your clients are more sales allergic than ever. 83% of a typical journey is going to be over before you get to meet with prospects and clients for virtualized network and data center related services. They've made up 83% of their mind before you get to meet them. And the only way that you're able to get back in and invited in early onto their side of the table through the awareness and the consideration stages of the journey, where all of the purchase criteria is figured out, is for you and your team to show up as consultants, as subject matter experts, as trusted advisors. This is a very, very different context than the traditional sales and marketing playbook that so many companies still use in and around the data center industry. So I would encourage you, if you want to more effectively use customer personas, the first thing to recognize is just how prevalent the self-propelled buyer's journey is, and make sure that everything that you're doing with your go-to-market investments and sales and marketing playbooks across the full go-to-market team, encompassing marketing, sales, account managers, customer success managers, product managers, channel partner managers, is very, very focused on identification of these buyer personas and what is top of mind for them, not what's top of mind for you. There will be time at the end of the buyer's journey where you can talk about your stuff, but early on, it's all about them. And the better job you do of understanding the goals, the objectives, the challenges, the stressors, the frustrations of your customer personas, of your buyer personas, the better job you're going to do with earning your way in and having a presence in as many of those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision as possible. So you stay with them throughout awareness when they know they have a big goal, big challenge that they need to figure out, but they have no idea what that name, what that solutions category even is. You stay with them throughout the consideration stage where, okay, now their solution has a name and they're starting to weigh the different kinds of approaches. They haven't gotten to companies yet, but they're weighing the different kind of approaches to potentially achieve this goal or solve this problem. This is where webinars, comparison guides, buyer's guides, all those can be super helpful. The decision stage for most companies that are like providing virtualized network services and data center services, usually they're doing an okay job with their buyer personas and their content and their event strategy at the decision stage, but they're usually completely asleep at the wheel in the early and the middle stages of the journey. And this can be a very, very dangerous oversight in the world that we live in today, because it completely opens the door for one of your competitors, one of your direct or indirect or non-business model competitors, to show up and have a dramatic influence on how your prospects and clients research and compare options and evaluate pricing, basically going through the full buyer's journey. So your customer personas force extreme empathy. It's a very, very important forcing factor of putting yourself in their shoes. I would also encourage you, when it comes to customer personas, to recognize that your company likely has limited resources to put into this kind of endeavor. So parents are told never to pick their favorite child, but you actually do need to pick your most important buyer persona. You need to prioritize your first and second and perhaps third most important buyer persona, designating as a primary, secondary, and a tertiary buyer persona. Because when it comes to limited resources and which to spend the more time on versus less time, it's very possible both of these or all three of these kinds of buyer personas are all members of the decision making committee, but some of them have more weight than others, right? So it's at the intersection of what they care about and what you care about. But at the end of the day, that's a really important forcing factor for personas. At the absolute minimum, when it comes to strategies and tactics and implementation, you should have a choice on your website navigation menu, your top navigation, your bottom navigation, your boxes or buttons that appear on your homepage that take people to a unique website page that is built to provide value to each one of those buyer personas separately. That should come as a very natural offshoot of doing your buyer persona research. On that page, juice it up with multimedia elements that make it competitive for today's buyer's journey. For sure, at the minimum, have a video, have some multimedia elements, have some premium content offers, one or more premium content offers that provide value at each stage of the buyer's journey for that specific buyer persona. In your drop-down lists on your web forms where you're trying to segment your leads, for sure, which of the following best describes you, and let them pick. And you certainly can have another, whether that other disqualifies them or forces you to dig deeper. But yeah, for sure, it impacts your navigation. And by the way, if you're doing competitive research, you can also use this to figure out how your competitors view their segmentation strategy and their buyer personas. But yeah, at the minimum, top navigation, bottom navigation, the boxes and buttons on your website, a separate website page for each of your buyer personas, separate lead generation offers for each of the three stages of the buyer's journey: awareness, consideration, and decision. Are incredibly important. And of course, this should all naturally flow through into your CRM, so you can segment your leads based on who they are, who the buyer persona is, and where they are in the buyer's journey or life cycle with your company, so you can make sure that your content and the events that you're inviting to are highly relevant for who they are and where they are in your particular journey. In some cases, too, you may decide to specialize your sales team and perhaps your marketing team based on individual buyer personas if you have the resources. So let's say, for example, when it comes to virtualized network and data center services, you decide that your primary buyer persona is a director of network services, and you decide that your secondary buyer persona is a managed service provider, a channel partner. That's a really interesting thing that a lot of people overlook too when it comes to buyer personas, is that unless you have Fortune 500 kind of brand name recognition, it is very likely that your channel account managers, your channel partner, your channel chiefs are going to have to do some work to attract the right kind of channel partners and nurture and educate and build trust with them over time. And then there's a whole separate battle once they're signed on and onboarded as new channel partners to activate them and continue to motivate them to want to sell and service your company's solutions. But at the absolute minimum, please, for the love of all that's it's good, is to make sure that you recognize that your channel partners likely care about different issues than your other buyer personas. So they should for sure be a different buyer persona. So that's another really important use case for a company that provides virtualized network and data center services. And it's possible over time that you end up with sub personas where you're like, okay, we have 2 or 3 different kinds of channel partners we engage with. Maybe they're 2 or 3 separate buyer personas or sub personas. But yeah, partners, your personas, your buyer personas, customer personas, whatever you want to call them, are an extremely important part of getting the segmentation right, personalizing, educating and building trust with at scale, and having a really, really important influential role with your most important prospects and clients and potentially channel partners throughout their full life cycle with your company. So that's how I would more effectively use personas: website navigation, drop down lists, separate pages, separate lead generation offer, and perhaps even specializing the roles, the job functions with individual team members, where you decide that you're going to devote a account executive or sales development resource or marketing resource or what have you to really go very, very deep on your most important or second most important kind of customer personas, buyer personas. How do data center sales professionals use LinkedIn and email campaigns to gain credibility? How do data center sales teams, sales professionals use LinkedIn and email marketing, email campaigns to gain credibility? That's a fantastic question. And I think a lot of sales professionals are really struggling with this now, especially if they have been working in digital infrastructure in the data center industry for 10 years or more, in a time where buyers used to spend a lot more of the journey with sales teams. Back 10 years ago, it was very common for about half of the buyer's journey, half of the sales cycle to happen with prospects and clients spending a lot of time with your account executives and sales development reps, as just a natural part of what they did. We now live in a world where so much is self-service, self-driven. This was accelerated with a couple of big trends as baby boomers are retiring and there's more Gen Z moving into the workplace and more millennials and Gen Xers moving into decision-making roles. There's certainly some generational shifts. And as these generational shifts have happened, typically anyone that was digitally resistant, that wasn't a big user of their smartphone or wasn't a big user of LinkedIn and YouTube, like, it just naturally changed over time. We also have the beginning of the 2020s, where millions of people were working from home for 2 years. That also accelerated this digital transformation and self-propelled buyer's journey. But the key thing to recognize is that your average prospect, your average client now has become more sales allergic than ever. So we have to work harder than ever to prove the value of sales professionals so they actually want to spend time with members of your team as opposed to the other way around. So a really simple back of the napkin way of looking at this is think about repositioning your sales team members that are some degree of subject matter experts, and they could even be relatively junior level subject matter experts, but they have this expertise. Think about repositioning your sales professionals to be seen more as consultants and advisors and teachers and subject matter experts, and some of the more advanced ones maybe as thought leaders. So what this means is the words that your sales professionals use for their job titles, in their email signature, on their LinkedIn profiles, on their business cards really, really matter. Because if you can address this the right way, you can get your sales team out of the vendor box. And by addressing this the right way, a lot of the positioning, at the risk of oversimplifying, is your prospects and clients should feel like they're getting so much value from spending time with members of your sales team that it feels like free enterprise consulting. It feels like they're spending time with someone who's a consultant that works for like a big four firm like EY or PwC or KPMG or Deloitte or something like that, or Accenture or some similar kind of Kyndryl, some other kind of firm like that. It should feel that valuable. Because when that happens, your prospects and clients actually want to spend time with members of your sales team. So your sales team doesn't have to spend a huge part of their week begging for attention and being the unwelcome pest. It's actually the other way around, is that your prospects and clients learn so much from spending time with members of your sales team. Not only they're not there to get their questions answered anymore. We know that the search engine and social media and Google and Alexa and Siri and Copilot and Gemini, they've won the battle for answering basic questions. Where your prospects and clients get value from spending time with members of your sales team is for the insights about the things that they haven't even thought about yet that are typically step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, there's typically 28 touch points that happen between complete stranger and purchase decision for most complex considered B2B technology purchases. So if your company, it doesn't matter whether you're an operator or a technology or facilities company or construction or real estate company, whatever you're doing in digital infrastructure or data centers, typically 25 or 30 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. To the extent that your prospects and clients want to voluntarily spend time with members of your sales team in as many of those 28 touch points as possible, you start to gradually win the war of attrition, because they're spending so much time with members of your team that they really don't need to look elsewhere for answers to their biggest questions to help them navigate this journey. And the way you provide exceptional value is anticipating what this particular person in this kind of company is going to need to know at step 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through the buyer's journey. And you're helping to guide them by asking fantastic questions like that, them thinking about things that they ought to be thinking about right now, but haven't even gotten to yet. Not only does that help to make sure that your prospects and clients see your sales professionals in a completely different light, it takes away opportunities for them to be spending time with other people because they're getting so much value from your team. It gets rid of price sensitivity. It nearly guarantees that you're on the short list. And in a lot of cases over time, it starts to knock companies off of the short list because they've realized things that your company is uniquely suited to provide that they had no idea that they even needed to be thinking about. All of these wonderful things happen when you decide that your sales professionals should no longer be seen as sales professionals and need to be seen more as teachers, trusted advisors, consultants, and subject matter experts. Sure, it's hiring a different kind of person. Sure, that person needs to have a commitment to professional development so that they're seen in a completely different light. And part of that professional development is something that the company, their employer, takes on. Part of it is they may take on the side. I've recently interviewed some people for our Data Center Go-to-Market podcast whose commitment to their nights and weekends learning is so next level that they show up looking more like a fractional CTO for a small and medium-sized business than someone that is a transaction-focused, commission-hungry salesperson. When you can, as a sales professional, especially for a data center operator, data center technology company, but this works with facilities and real estate and construction as well. When you can get your prospects and clients to see you as someone who has roughly the same background and skills and expertise as a paid consultant, wonderful, wonderful things happen in that relationship with a respect for what you bring to the table, what your sales team brings to the table. So when it comes to data center sales professionals using LinkedIn and email campaigns to gain credibility, now that we know what credibility looks like, how is this actually implemented on LinkedIn and with email campaigns? How this looks is your sales professionals should be collaborating with members of your marketing team to be part of these thought leadership and education initiatives. For some of the more junior members on your team, they can be moderators, they can be tour guides, they can be concierges, they can be the resource people that points their prospects and clients in the direction of others and other resources on your team at more senior levels, which sounds a lot like what SDRs, what sales development reps and business development reps, BDRs, have historically done, right? So this is kind of reinventing the role of the SDR and the BDR. Marketing is going to look a lot more like a media company than traditional marketing going forward. You're building a media company for your most important buyer personas, so you become less dependent on external media companies because you're already knocking it out of the park with your own educational content and your own educational events. So your account executives, your sales development reps, your AEs, and your SDRs are taking a really, really big role in showing up early and often in the production of these thought leadership resources. This doesn't mean that it becomes a huge percentage of their week, but for sure it does mean that when your go-to-market team is having its quarterly meetings and stand-ups and whatever else you're doing to plan strategy, that when you're marketing, your media folks internally are asking for volunteers for who can help moderate this panel, who can be interviewed on this podcast, who can be interviewed for this resource. you should for sure be instilling a culture where someone from your sales team can find a half hour once a month, every other week, every 6 weeks, whatever it is, to show up and participate in these kinds of initiatives. So they're baked into the company's thought leadership assets. That alone does wonderful, wonderful things for what that sales professional can now do on LinkedIn, because your marketing team is able to post produce those assets so that the member of your sales team is in the thumbnail for the event, or has part of the byline credit on the downloadable report, or your marketing team is able to cut out sections of that video where that particular salesperson is doing introductions, recap, adding their point of view, and shorts and documents and carousels. So in other words, you are helping that sales professional reinvent themselves to show up as a thought leader, or at least a consultant, a teacher, a trusted advisor, in a completely different light from how they currently are doing it. Because most sales professionals in the data center industry, when it comes to LinkedIn, are showing a lot of really selfish content. They're showing their product PDFs. Hey, we won an award, clap for us. We're going to be at this conference, make time to meet with us. It's all about them. It's not about your prospects and clients. And in order for your prospects and clients to see your sales professionals in a completely different light, they need to see your sales professionals as experts, as consultants, as advisors, and not just someone that's just focused on their own selfish needs. So that's how LinkedIn changes. And email changes in the same way, because now instead of your SDRs, your BDRs spending 90% of their time sending cold messages by email and cold messages on LinkedIn and cold calls begging for meetings, you're primarily focused on getting the right people to be aware of and consume these educational resources. Like, hey, I know because you are a CTO of a data center operator. Hey, I know because you're the compliance officer for a financial services company. If you're like most, you're currently struggling with this issue. That's the reason why we're hosting a webinar next Thursday. We thought you'd really enjoy attending. Here's the link to learn more and sign up. When they sign up, hey, it's great to see that you signed up, but we all know that when it comes to compliance in a data center, it takes a village. Typically, it's a multidisciplinary team with people from these XYZ whatever roles. So if there's other people from your team that you think should also attend or watch this recording, whatever, hit the forward button, let them know why this is. So this is the basic playbook. If this sounds completely foreign or you're extraordinarily resistant to this, understand there are companies in this space that have been executing this playbook for 10 or more years already. So this isn't a nice to have. This isn't what's necessarily going to put you out in front of the lead. But I can tell you without a doubt that if you're burying your head in the sand and you're hoping that you're selling to 85-year-old decision makers who only occasionally use their phones and don't go on LinkedIn very often and don't use YouTube very much and still have secretaries that print out their emails on paper and read that to them and book their meetings on it. If you think you're selling to this metaphorical, fictional decision maker who existed in the 2010s that still has a major role in the decision-making process, you need to spend time updating your customer personas and interviewing your most important personas and in your ideal client profile to understand what's truly going on in the marketplace. So if you want your sales team to have a major, major role going forward in these conversations throughout the full buyer's journey, so they keep the pricing power and the margins they need, so they're seen in the right light, so they're building a personal and a professional brand, so they're reinforcing your company's brand, your LinkedIn and your email just becomes an extension of this whole initiative to reinvent your sales team to be seen as consultants, teachers, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, and the most important, the most elevated, the most seasoned members of those roles in those roles will even be seen as thought leaders. But this is a big mindset shift for so many in the data center industry, which is why it needs to start as a top-down initiative. For a relatively small company with a few dozen or fewer employees, or even up to a few hundred employees, your CEO should be out front leading this initiative. If you can't get your CEO to show up for a half hour once or twice a month to talk about and reinforce this, ain't going to happen. For a much larger company, like a chief commercial officer, chief revenue officer, chief marketer officer, they're typically the internal champions on this kind of initiative. But make no mistake, for a lot of companies in the data center industry, this is a massive cultural change, but it's one that's incredibly important for your company to stay competitive and relevant to what your buyer personas care most about and how they want to research and make their purchase decisions going forward. And that brings us to our final question for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream. The final question that we'll be addressing this week is, how can a data center marketing and sales consulting firm reach decision makers? How does a company that provides data center sales and marketing consulting reach decision makers? So what's really interesting about the nature of this question is, by definition, a company that provides sales and marketing outsourced services in and around the data center industry should be an expert at reaching decision makers. So it's really curious that we got this question in the first place. But that said, I think a lot of relatively small companies or solo consultants that struggle with this are struggling with a lot of the same product market fit issues, PMF issues that so many other companies in this space have to deal with, is knowing exactly who your ideal clients are, what products and services they purchase from you, at what price points, in what durations or frequencies, and what all the unit economics end up looking like. The lifetime value, LTV, the client acquisition costs, CAC, or sometimes called cost of client acquisition, COCA, and your average sales cycle length, and then you back into your gross margins and net margins. These are all really, really important concepts to get your mind around to be successful in understanding what's actually going on in the business. And the nature of what your company does will dictate, in a lot of cases, your capabilities, your team size will, in a lot of cases, dictate how you define your ideal client profile and your addressable market. Like, in other words, it's very unlikely that you can sell globally in dozens of different languages, because in order for you to sell globally in dozens of different languages, you'd have to have members of your team that can attend meetings in time zones that would, cause you to basically have no ability to sleep at some point. So you're going to pick your battles geographically, and you most likely will also pick your battles based on language, based on existing capabilities. For example, if all or nearly all of your team members only speak English, you're probably not going to be selling to clients that need you to be creating and promoting content and building a brand awareness in languages outside of English. And same issues for localization. So your team capabilities, your team locations will, in many cases, be a forcing factor for defining your ideal client profile. In other words, where your ideal clients are located, their company size. That's a really big issue for companies that provide outsourced sales and marketing in and around the data center industry. Among your clients, what kind of client is so small that they can't afford your minimums? What kind of client is so large that they would likely do what you do in-house? That's the Goldilocks of defining what's not too big, not too small, but just right. And if you're using a very LinkedIn-centric approach, I'd encourage you to think in terms of headcount, employee headcount that you can clearly filter on and go after on LinkedIn. It's likely not a big secret either that many of the decision makers that you go after are getting bombarded, inundated with companies that all look the same to them and are providing a rather undifferentiated approach, despite the fact that you're supposed to be, among other things, an expert in differentiation. So it's like who they are, what they care about, who are the buyer personas, and then you need to do for yourself what you plan on doing for them. In other words, if you're talking about content marketing, if you're talking about social media, if you're talking about events, if you're talking about branding, make yourself the first client for your company. So you've likely heard the metaphor of eating your own dog food, drinking your own champagne. At the end of the day, if you have certain capabilities in mind that you want to market to the data center industry for outsourced sales and marketing consulting, you should really be your own best case study. You really should be using these for yourself. So when it comes to reaching decision makers, being very deliberate about the definition of who the ideal client is, being very deliberate about who the prioritized primary and secondary buyer personas are, doing the actual buyer persona research so you know what their biggest goals and challenges are, and then actually executing your content strategy, your event strategy, so that you're able to show up early and often and be seen in the right places by the right people at the right time, and most of all in the right context, so that when it comes to anything and everything having to do with sales and marketing in the data center industry, that you're seen as the top expert, one of the go-to experts in this space. And just bear in mind with all of this that the data center industry is very fragmented. We've done research, our segmentation strategy that you can see right on DCSMI, as we divide up the industry into the operators, also sometimes known as the providers. These are like the co-location, wholesale, hyperscale, edge, and modular companies. There's 22 different kinds of technology companies that we've cataloged. There's a dozen or so facilities related companies. There's a handful of construction and real estate related companies, investment related companies. And then there's the whole stack within sales and marketing, which actually, believe it or not, has a lot more than wood meets the eye. There's 5 or 6 different kinds of companies there. So altogether, we count about 52 different kinds of business models plus the operators. So closing in on 55 to 60 different kinds of business models in and around the data center ecosystem. So when it comes to providing outsourced marketing and sales, you have to think about how versatile your company is. Can you effectively service all 55 to 60 different segments, or are you going to pick certain kinds of business models within those in certain kinds of regions, and certain kinds of sizes? And the more you start to filter this down, the easier it is to back into who your ideal client profile is and build your target account list if you're using something like account-based marketing, ABM. But yeah, reaching the decision maker is probably one of the biggest challenges for companies that are providing outsourced marketing and sales consulting, is making sure that you treat yourself as your best clients. The same kind of methodology that you use with your clients, you should be using on yourself to help attract and engage and educate and build trust with these decision makers over time. Because in many ways, the level of cynicism and skepticism that so many in this industry see among IT and facilities professionals, you're going to see as well with marketing and executives and sales professionals to a certain degree. So use your own processes, use your own methodology to make sure that you're able to show up and early and often, so you're involved in as many of those 28 touch points as possible. So you're with your ideal clients, your ideal prospects throughout their full buyer's journey, and not just showing up at the tail end and expecting a Hail Mary kind of miracle. That's the mistake your clients make. Don't make the same mistake for yourself of assuming very, very incorrectly that everyone is sales ready. It's like going into a car dealership and the salesperson only wanting to talk to people that are going to buy or lease today. Don't be that person. You're not going to want to just market and sell to people that are going to elope on a first date. It makes for a amusing Ashton Kutcher movie, but the reality is, when it comes to marketing and sales consulting, your clients, very, 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 very few cases where the initial conversation is going to accelerate all the way to a single call kind of close, unless there was an enormous amount of personal and professional brand building and social proof and things like that went along with that. So think full buyer's journey, think in terms of a decision committee, multiple stakeholders, and the same way you would approach building go-to-market strategy, marketing and sales enablement kind of strategy for your clients. Use the same playbook for your company. It's incredibly important, and it will give you a great template and blueprint to be able to build a methodology that you can use for your clients as well. So that is how a data center marketing and sales consulting firm can reach decision makers. Eat your own dog food, drink your own champagne, be your own best case study. So that's the final question that we have time to address for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. If you want to make sure that you stay up to date and get notified about upcoming live streams, webinars, and other educational resources like this, make sure you get our weekly email newsletter delivered directly to your email inbox on Sundays, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Newsletter. You can subscribe on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Until next time, I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and I wish you great success in growing and improving your go-to-market sales and marketing results. Take care now and have a great week.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.